Hey everybody, welcome. Good to have you back again. In today's session, we are going to start up a new unit, and that unit is European Overseas Expansion. Now, this is something that I think you've covered in some way, shape, or form, probably since elementary school, whether it's overseas explorers, whether it's colonization. I think that you've hit this stuff before, but we're going to do it again, and that's because this is such a hugely important part of the development of the history of Western civilization. Without overseas expansion, whether Europeans did it on accident or on purpose, Europe does not become the real global economic and political power center that it becomes. European overseas expansion signals a gradual but inexorable shift in power away from the East, where realistically that's where it had been since the fall of Rome, to the West, to Western Europe. This is a huge, huge part of that development of history, and we're going to look at it here in that unit. And we'll begin the unit with what I call expanding horizons. We're going to look at some of the European overseas explorations and some of the explorers who took part in these explorations. And one of the things that we'll look at first are the driving factors behind that exploration. Why were Europeans venturing into the Atlantic Ocean, off into the unknown? What are these people looking for? Why are they taking on these risky, dangerous journeys? What is in it for them? Then we'll examine the two principal countries who were most involved early on when it came to European overseas exploration. That'd be the Portuguese and the Spanish. We'll look at why the Portuguese first set out into the Atlantic Ocean, and then we'll look at some of their more notable explorers. Where did they travel? Why were these travels significant? And then the Spanish. Who are their most notable explorers? Where did they travel? And what made these explorations significant? So those are the essential questions. That's what we're going to cover in this session today. Thus, without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. All right. Why? We need the why first, okay? If we recall, Crusades. After the Crusades, Europeans had a huge demand for luxury goods from the East. Spices, silk, other luxury goods. Well, by the 1300s, the European economy is heavily dependent upon these luxury trade goods from the East, especially spices, silk, all that other stuff that we mentioned earlier. Well, look, travel between East and West, between West and East, East and West, whatever, Europe, Asia, it's really, really long, okay? Going by land from Europe to Asia, you're looking at, if you move fast, a round trip of about 3 years' time. That's a really, really long time. So the distance travel is very, very long, but it's also very dangerous. You're having to travel not just huge distances, but very, very dangerous terrain. You're encountering constant wars. Bandits and thieves are a constant, ever-present threat. If you're traveling for trade, you've got lots of trade goods. You have lots of wealth on you. It's a target on your back, so it's not safe. It's very dangerous. Additionally, when the city of Constantinople fell to the Muslims in 1453, trade between East and West became even more difficult because Constantinople was sort of like the central hub from which all the other Eastern trade routes traveled. And now that Constantinople was in the hands of the Muslims, people who weren't very friendly to the Western Europeans, trade was going to get much, much more difficult. So Europeans looked to find a safer, better way to reach Asia, and the only option that appeared to them really was the sea route. The land route was a problem, so they took to the sea to try to find a faster, safer way to reach Asia. This is really what drives that exploration out of the Atlantic, seeking out sea routes to reach the riches of Asia for trade. And the first country to set out into the Atlantic is the Portuguese. However, originally the Portuguese weren't going out there trying to find this magical sea route to Asia. They had a different motive. You see, Portugal was constantly falling victims to attacks from North African Muslim pirates. What they were doing, the North African Muslims, were attacking the southern coasts of Spain and kidnapping people and selling them into slavery. And so originally what the Portuguese were doing was venturing into Africa to attack the bases of these pirates to stop these, slaver missions. And so those were their first motions into Africa, which were very successful, luckily for them. And as they continued further and further down the coast of Africa, they kind of wanted to see what else was out there. Were there more Christians out there who were willing to be allies in their fight against the Muslims, or was there trade to be had? And so by 1460 or so, the Portuguese had worked their way about a third of the way down the coast of Africa, and over the next 20 to 30 years, they want to see how far down does Africa go? What other trade is there to be had? By 1487, the Portuguese explorer Bartholomew Diaz had reached all the way to the southern tip of Africa. by accident, I might add, but that's a whole other story. So by 1487, the Portuguese had gone all the way to the very bottom of Africa. And when you consider how large Africa is, this is a pretty impressive achievement. 10 years later, another Portuguese sailor by the name of Vasco da Gama sailed not just to the southern tip of Africa, but all the way up the other side to India, to Asia. Now, this is huge because this is the first real sea route from Europe to Asia. Now, I say this is the first real sea route, and if you don't know why I'm saying it's the first real sea route, that will become much more apparent later on. But the Portuguese, who focused a lot on the coasts of Africa, find the first real sea route from Europe to Asia. Well done, Mr. da Gama. Now, in the late 1400s, Portugal's neighbor, Spain, wants to get involved in the race for Asian trade, and they do so under the combined rule of their new king and queen, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. And Spain is now, for the first time in centuries, united under one government, and so they're looking to get involved in the race for Asian wealth. And of course, this is the part in the story where the guy that everybody knows comes into play. That is one Christopher Columbus, or Cristoforo Colombo. The Italians will never let you forget that he's actually Italian and not Spanish. But so you have this Italian navigator, Christopher Columbus, who believes that the world is round. And let me explain to you why it's not that big of a deal. Because, in elementary school, they always tried to teach me, when I was a kid anyway, that this was somehow special. That Christopher Columbus was like the only guy who thought the world was round and everybody else thought it was flat. Well, this is total baloney. Guys, it's 1492. This is the era of the Renaissance. There are way more educated people in Europe by this time, and the vast majority of educated people in Europe, probably all of them, were very certain that the world was indeed round. So Columbus believing that the world was round was nothing new. That was nothing special. What was different about Columbus and his idea was his approach to travel to Asia, because he believed the world was round. See, Columbus is like, guys, why are we sailing all the way around Africa? The world is round. We can just sail west to get to Asia. Now, of course, we know that that's kind of not going to work. Columbus didn't know that, though. He thinks that this is a brilliant idea, and he tries peddling that idea to different folks throughout Europe. And of course, everyone turns him down until famously he reaches his last resort. That would be the king and queen of Spain, and he, offers his idea to them. Originally, they turn him down, and he's leaving the city. And as the legend goes, the messenger of Queen Isabella hunts him down and says, "Hey, you know what? We'll take a shot at your crazy idea. We will fund an expedition for you to sail west across the Atlantic to try to find Asia." So Queen Isabella agrees to finance Columbus's crazy expedition to sail west to reach Asia. Good luck, buddy. So she gives him 3 small ships. Everybody knows the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. And they really were, in a lot of ways, they were kind of like junk ships. She didn't give him the best stuff that she had because she figured, this guy's, it's kind of crazy. Sail west, all the way west to reach Asia. You know what? I'll give him 3 ships, and if he makes it, great, it was a good investment. And if not, I haven't wasted much. So, in August of 1492, Columbus sets sail from Spain with his 3 tiny little ships. And for 6 weeks, he and his crew are out at sea, braving unknown waters, unknown conditions. Honestly, a crew full of criminals because recruitment was difficult. They had to recruit people out of prisons, a near mutiny. But finally, after 6 weeks, on October 12th, they sight land. And they explore what we all know to be the present-day Caribbean islands and Cuba. Columbus, on the other hand, doesn't know that. He calls the new land Hispaniola, and he claims it for Spain. Where does he think he is? He thinks he's in Asia, India to be exact, and he even names the people he meets there Indians, as we all know. That's why, as kids, we played cowboys and Indians and not cowboys and Native Americans. Anyway, so Columbus doesn't realize that he's not in India. He spends several weeks exploring these islands, thinking that he's in the Indies, without realizing that he had reached a sort of previously unknown continent. Now, this is a guy who's looking for the riches of Asia. He's looking for gold. He's looking for spices. He's looking for silk. And he finds about as much gold on these islands as I'm going to find on the bottom of my shoe. And that is to say, little to none. No spices, no silk, no nothing. But he explores for a while, maps the place out, brings a few natives back with him, and returns home to Spain. All to prove that he actually did find something. And so even though he brought back no riches, no gold, no spices, he is nonetheless greatly rewarded by the king and queen because they think that he's really on to something here. When, I mean, he was, just not the something he thought that he was. Now, not a lot of people realize this, but Columbus would actually make 3 more trips to Hispaniola before his death in 1506, all trying to prove that he really was in India, looking for those seaports of Asia and looking for that Asian wealth when he never, ever would find it, going to his grave empty-handed. And it would not be until 1507, a year after Columbus's death, that another Italian explorer by the name of Amerigo Vespucci came to realize that the land Columbia reached was not Asia, but was instead a brand new continent, a new world. And since it was Amerigo Vespucci who was the first one to point this out, when they started drawing maps of this new continent and new world, this new continent was labeled America, in honor of Amerigo Vespucci. That's why it's North America, South America, United States of America, and not North Columbia, South Columbia, and the United States of Columbia. So in 1519, by now, everybody's pretty sure Columbus did not find Asia. They're very, very certain of it. And so since they know that Columbus didn't find Asia, people are still looking to find Asia by sailing west. So in 1519, the Spanish contract a Portuguese mercenary named Ferdinand Magellan. And they give him 5 ships, and they give him 200 men. And they send him out across the Atlantic Ocean, still trying to find Asia. Because even though people are like, yeah, we know Columbus didn't really reach Asia, they're really, really sure that even though that's not Asia, Asia has to be somewhere really close by. So the Spanish send Ferdinand Magellan out to sea with 5 ships and over 200 men to find the super secret magical sea passage that will take you from the Americas straight to Asia. Yeah, we know that's not going to work too well. I mean, there's no magical sea... I guess there's kind of a magical sea passage. It's called the Pacific Ocean, but that's not really going to get you there that fast. So he sends out 5 ships, 200 men, and they spend 3 years sailing across the world, and they never find their magical sea passage to Asia. They do, however, in the 3 years, manage to do something that no one else had ever done, and that was to circumnavigate the globe. That is to say, they sailed all the way around the darn thing, going in one direction. And really, the whole voyage was a fiasco from start to finish. Over the course of the 3 years, they lose 4 of the 5 ships. Ferdinand Magellan himself dies halfway through in the Philippines, gets killed by some natives in the middle of a civil war, which begs another question. Why does Ferdinand Magellan get all the credit for circumnavigating the globe? The dude died halfway through. Unreal. The real person who should get credit for circumnavigating the globe is Magellan's first mate, Pedro Elcano. That's the guy who actually finished the journey from beginning to end. Anyway, so 3 years, they circumnavigate the globe, they lose 4 of the 5 ships, Magellan dies, and when they finally limp back into harbor in Spain in 1522, only 18 of the original 200-plus crew members are still alive. What a mess. Financially, this voyage is an absolute failure. But what the voyage does provide is worth far more than money for knowledge and future. What it does provide is more knowledge of the world. People learn that, yes, the world is, without a doubt, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the world is round. Because we left Spain sailing west, we kept sailing west, and we made it back to Spain. It also proves to people that the world is made up largely of water and that all the oceans of the world are connected. So you can sail around the world only by boat. It also tells people that the world is a whole lot bigger than they actually realize. So there's a lot of knowledge gained from this. And, then there's that whole navigation system that you can put in your car called Magellan, which I think, again, is totally bogus because Magellan didn't really circumnavigate the globe. He died. Should be called Elcano. That guy deserves the credit. History, you are failing us by giving Magellan the credit. Anyway, that's my bit on that. Well, that's pretty much it for us for today, guys. We looked at the driving factors behind exploration. We looked at the factors that drove Europeans to begin exploring the Atlantic. They were trying to find a sea route to Asia because what were they in it for? Trade, wealth, money. Then we looked at the Portuguese explorers and the Spanish explorers, the two really principal early countries that were getting involved in the race for Eastern riches. Who were their early explorers? What were these guys doing? And why was it significant? So those are the essential questions that we covered here today, guys. Make sure you study them, make sure you know, and be ready to talk about them the next time that we meet. And as always, until that time, I bid you farewell.